Hello everyone, welcome to Winthrop in the World. I'm Paul Baskin, and with us today is the police chief here in Winthrop, John Goodwin. Chief Goodwin, thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious, how did you get into being a police officer? I guess you worked in Winthrop in Revere for a while, then Winthrop?
That's correct, yeah. My family's very involved in law enforcement. I had two brothers, a cousin. So I started in Revere in 1995. Covered just about every aspect of the department. I was a patrol supervisor. I ran the traffic division. My last job there, I was the lieutenant in charge of the investigation division. I came over here in 2017. Former Chief Delahanty hired me as his deputy, and I spent about 7 years with him, which was a great experience. He was somewhat of a mentor and a mentor, and and then Tony, the town manager Marino, offered me the position, and here I am about a year later now.
Yeah. So one thing that I and some other people in town have done is take part in what you run a civilian police academy, where you introduce people in the town to what it's like to be an officer. And among the things that sort of stick out for me is the danger element, the concern about. I remember you went into a while about the shooting drills and what it's like to face that kind of moment. And I gather that's not something, fortunately, is a daily occurrence, but still a pretty serious one. What's it like to feel that?
Thank God it's very rare. We train pretty extensively, which we've increased, I think, since my tenure on firearms training. We have a simulator, and we love to bring the citizens into that because it really gives them a feeling of what type of emotions you're having when you're in a situation that you have to make a decision, which could be life or death. But the simulator is a live screen that it does get your emotions going a little bit, and
you have people yelling at you, and you just
yes, there's all kinds of distractions, right? Yeah. And that's the real world. And the Citizens Police Academy is something that I recommend that everybody go through, because I think it's what I call it, a force multiplier. People come, they experience what it's like to be a police officer. They listen to us. They realize that we're real people, and you get a good idea of the difficulties that we work under, and you go home and you tell your families about it. And I think it's a great program. Deputy Rogers and Lieutenant Krasafi, they do a wonderful job.
Yeah, Steve Rogers is great.
Yeah.
And it's it's free, just so people know. And I guess it's like once a year, and it goes. I think it was like 10 weeks, and on
it's
Thursday
10
night?
weeks. It's on the same night every week. It usually runs about 2.5 to 3 hours, and we cover a different subject matter, whether it's evidence, domestic violence, narcotics, patrol, traffic. We cover a different subject matter for over the 10-week period. We do a ride-along where you actually go out with a police officer. Again, I think it's just everybody should try it, because I think it really builds a good relationship between the community and the police.
So thank you for that. So one of the main issues I think that's concerning at least a number of people in town these days is the situation with immigration. The situation that happened here in Winthrop a couple weeks ago, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, where there were 2 people picked up, I gather, by federal agents, presumably ICE agents. It's a difficult topic. It's a complicated topic. We can't go on forever about it. But as best you can sort of tell people in Winthrop, what is going on? Is there we're hearing sort of these stories nationwide, and certainly in Massachusetts, where officers, at least by some descriptions, these federal officers just showing up, grabbing people. Nobody seems to know what's going on with them or what's happening to them. What's your relationship with that? And what can you tell us? What can you tell the people of the town about what's going on?
Okay, so we work with federal law enforcement regularly, and we have a great working relationship with all the federal agencies, including ICE. And it's a relationship built on trust. They have a job to do. I don't think they're running around just pulling people out of cars. They have a plan, and I don't want to get into their particular investigations, because honestly, we have no authority to enforce federal laws. Our practice is, particularly with ICE, is if they're in town and they're doing an administrative detainer or a civil detainer, we would not be involved in that, in detaining people. We don't have the authority to do that. So, but I want my people to be present because I have people in town with firearms, a bulletproof vest. I think we need to be there to represent the town. Our number one priority is certainly to keep all the residents of the town safe, and that's our number one priority, is keeping the community safe.
So we see some of these cases where it looks like afterward, the one with the tough student, for instance, and the one about the guy who's in El Salvador, where there's some question as to whether these were legitimate pickups of people. Is there anything that you can say to the people of this town who might be concerned about that happening to them, that there's anything the police, the local police, can do to ensure that that kind of thing doesn't happen here?
Well, you know, we don't have the authority to tell them not to come to town, which we all understand, and that's why we prefer to have a good working relationship to limit the potential for violence if they're pursuing someone that is of criminal design, that might have arrest warrants. And again, you know, if they're in town and they're looking for particular individuals on civil detainers or administrative detainers, we'll have a conversation, but we're not actively involved in detaining people because, again, we don't have the authority to do that.
But would you be involved in maybe deterring them from doing it, at least sort of doing some kind of surface level check to make sure that they're getting the right people?
They would request, and we'll assist them with some information. We might say that person hasn't been here for 5 years.
Yeah.
But when it's criminal, you know, when they're seeking someone based on some criminal activity or criminal warrants, you know, I would feel as though I'd be negligent not to be involved. My job is, again, to keep the community safe. And if there's someone in this town, whether it's illegal or not illegal, it's my job to know who that is and what can I do to limit the possibilities of any violence.
Right. Do you have a general take on the immigrant population in this town and nearby? Because I recall the Civilian Academy, again, you described at least one case in Revere, I think it was, where you were at least concerned that some of these people were in this country for not great reasons, I guess. I'm just wondering, do you have sort of an overall perspective on what you are seeing in the immigrant population here?
We haven't really had any real specific issues with our immigrant population. As we all know, we have, you know, our Hispanic population is growing. We have a pretty significant Albanian population. I think, you know, our department, for its size, is probably one of the most diverse in the greater Boston area. You know, I think we've always paid attention to that. And you know, where does the migrant population get involved in criminal activity? And you'll hear me repeatedly through this interview talk about narcotics and gangs. I think those are the two biggest threats to any community.
Right.
I think the gang culture or subculture hasn't really rooted itself in Winthrop, and I think a big reason for that is when the real estate values in East Boston kind of skyrocketed, it kind of pushed that population out and dispersed it amongst other North Shore communities. And I think, you know, Revere might have taken had a little bit of an uptick, Lynn, Chelsea, but I think the real estate values in Winthrop really kind of, it wasn't desirable for that economic level that these people could afford. So I think that's one of the reasons. Of course, we train all our officers in identifying, you know, gangs before it becomes a problem. And narcotics are always an issue, and we've had a solid plan for 7 or 8 years where we're constantly, you know, trying to fight the illegal narcotics coming into town.
Right. And how is that? I mean, it sounds like you're saying that you're overall in pretty good shape on that. Is that where you're?
I believe we are. I believe, the people that I have working with me, my team, has just done a fantastic job. Right now, a lot of our problems is people, they're not homegrown. In other words, I think we've dealt with a lot of that over the last several years. And again, my detectives have done in the patrol guys, gathering intelligence and sharing information. We've managed to, it takes constant maintenance, but I think we've managed to eliminate a lot of that. And now we kind of focused on, people that are delivering drugs into the town.
Okay.
So, we took on the drug issue, and I think that's one of the reasons why Terry brought me here, former Chief Delahunty. But, that's the enforcement side of it, but there's other approaches, right? I mean, our CLEAR team has been recognized nationally.
CLEAR is the team that sort of
That's right. They
works.
do follow-ups with people that are suffering from substance abuse. That's not who we're targeting. We're not targeting, people that are suffering from substance abuse, for enforcement. Our targeting is more people that are profiting from the illegal narcotics, and so we got a kind of a two-prong approach. And,
Is that sort of the top? I was going to ask you, what's the top criminal problem you see in this town? Is that it, or is there something else that you would point out?
well, I think that's always the biggest threat in any community. Our calls for service are probably, I would say, domestic violence is a problem. That we're constantly monitoring. We produce an annual report every year, right around budget time, which is for several reasons. We like to report back to the town government. This is what's going on in the department. This is what we're looking at, and we look at any trends, any crime trends, what's spiking. We've seen domestic violence a few years ago, starting to increase a little bit. So the CLEAR team added a domestic violence advocate. We have, officers that are, pretty committed to that particular.
Especially trained in that?
Yeah, everybody's trained in it, but it's probably our number one arrest is probably for domestic violence. When you look at our arrest,
Right. I was thinking of asking this later, but now that you're sort of getting into it, which is the sort of that back in the period after the George Floyd situation, there was the defund talk, and some of that seems, not well informed. But to the degree there was sort of an element there, which is the idea that maybe there should be more distinction between roles that require an armed officer to handle them and one that does not. Could you sort of say where you are on that? Do you feel like is there something you've done specifically, or the department's done specifically, to sort of differentiate between situations that require an armed response and those do not, and maybe right-size that a little bit?
Yeah, so the George Floyd incident, which occurred, I feel like the Northeast United States is some of the best trained police officers in the country. The George Floyd incident was certainly, a horrible tragedy that should have never happened. What have we done since then is we train the entire department on biases and implicit biases. Right. We bring in a nationally known subject matter expert, came in he was a former chief of police from Lansing, Michigan, and we ran the whole department through it. And I think, everybody has them. If you sat here and told me you didn't have them.
I mean, have them as problematic?
Biases, everybody has them.
Biases.
I don't care who you are. If you tell me you don't, then, your credibility would be lacking with me. But you just learn to know what they are, and you learn to not let them influence your decision making. That's pretty much what the training was about. And I think we were ahead of the curve with that. And that was one of the major things that we did. And I don't see it as a problem here. We have a very diverse department, and I don't see that problem. I don't see that problem here at all.
Do you know the rough number? I mean, I realize you don't want to talk about numbers too much, but just in the diversity, what numbers are you thinking of when you talk about a diverse department?
We have African American officers. We had one just recently retire. We have Albanian. We have Puerto Rican. We have Portuguese. I think we're very, very well represented.
And you in good shape on Spanish-speaking officers or other officers? Yeah.
Yes, we have. I'm going to say 3. I have 1 Portuguese, 2 Spanish, 3 Spanish, an Italian. So I think we're in good shape, yes.
So another issue, and I know this was something that was controversial, I suppose, at the time, which was that report in 2022 by the Vera Institute that sort of ranked police departments in Suffolk County, and it was about racial disparities in traffic stops, and it had bad numbers for Winthrop, frankly, at the time.
It certainly did, and we dug very deep into that, myself and Chief Delahanty. Like any other research, I think there was some issues with the research in and of itself. They targeted certain violations that they didn't count all violations. They counted a certain number of violations. It's been a while since I've looked at this, but I looked at it pretty deeply when that article broke because we were concerned about it. They targeted violations, and I'll give you an example, something like tinted windows, right? But that's very common in the immigrant population. It's something that's popular, right? So, and it was, driving with a suspended license. That's something that at the time, the immigrants, illegal immigrants couldn't get a driver's license in Massachusetts, right? So I think the violations that they used was more targeted towards that population.
Right.
They also used data that was from the previous census. It was old, right? The data was old. The town's changed, as we all know, over the last 10 years.
Sure.
And one of the things that weren't counted, and this we've made some changes because of it, is verbal warnings. Like if we stop a resident or we stop a motor vehicle, and we just give them a verbal warning. We weren't tracking the data. It's sort of like garbage in, garbage out, right? We weren't tracking that data. If we stop, 1,000 cars, in Winthrop, it's a small town, 700 of them are going to be verbal warnings. Like our numbers were really, that threw our numbers off a lot.
Yeah.
We review our own data every year in our annual report. We break it down by gender, race, age, and we look at, all of those numbers to make sure that we don't have a problem. We examine that every year, and that report is available. I believe it's online through the town manager's office. And then there was another report that was put out. I'm not sure if it was the Executive Office of Public Safety. It was another state agency that did a counter, or there might have been previously that they did a research on the same subject matter that reported just the opposite. So it depends on what was the objective of the research, right?
So it sounds like you're saying that in some cases the report data may not have been great, but there's maybe, to the degree there's issues, you're working on them. You talked about the bias training.
Bias training, that's right. And we take those things very seriously. And I would add, too, that, during Rachel Rollins' tenure,
she was the DA, the Suffolk County DA,
Suffolk County District Attorney. She was an advocate for constitutional policing, fairness in policing. And we had a couple of issues, we had a couple of investigations here that were a little racially sensitive, and she publicly recognized this department, and her exact words were, you should be honored to have the leadership that you have because they were addressing the problem, and we're serious about it. And she said that, and that's kind of a badge of honor coming from Rachel Rollins, who we had a great working relationship with.
Right, and she was very strong on
very
racial
strong,
issues. On
very
racial
strong,
issues too.
right.
Politics, can't avoid it. How much does that complicate your job, the politics in this country? Is it fair to say that the police are maybe more identified politically on one side? Does that help you, hurt you, interfere with your ability to deal with the public?
Yeah, I think the way that I approach politics, and I've said this in my career in Revere, I've said it to this town manager. I just always felt like policing and politics is not good chemistry, right? So, being the chief, there is some political issues that I have to deal with, but we'll talk, like I just mentioned, Rachel Rollins. my job is not to let my political ideologies get in the way of my decision making, and I don't. And Rachel Rollins had a platform which I had. Again, I'm only using her because she was the most recent that we've had a lot of experience with. And the current ADA, we have a great relationship with Kevin Hayden, and we speak regularly. But she had certain crimes that were publicly advertised in the local newspapers that we're not going to prosecute for this, and this.
I remember that.
Well, my approach to that is, if those crimes are being committed in my neighborhood, those are crimes. I have an oath to uphold, the laws of the Commonwealth. Then the political legislature or the political bodies should have the courage to change those laws.
Right.
So we're going to continue to do our job to keep the people in this town safe and to make sure that we're constantly working to improve the quality of life.
Yeah, that's another issue I was going to come up later, but you've led me into it, which is the question of how in the world do you and your officers decide? I mean, if you walk outside in the street, you might see 10 different things within the space of 10 minutes that you potentially could either charge somebody, give them a ticket for, arrest them for, who knows what. Right. I mean, how in the world do you you just look at the world and make that decision when you walk out into it?
Discretion is something that every officer has, right? And we utilize it every day. If you're engaging the same person for the same types of violations, how many times do you give a verbal warning, or let's talk about traffic, right? Or then eventually, that behavior ain't changing. You have to do something. It's like dealing with juveniles, which is, juveniles, can be frustrating sometimes. But you see what does that juvenile have around him for support? What is his support group? Is it better off dragging him into the system? Right. We have all kinds of diversity programs. We have C4RJ. We do everything we can not to charge a juvenile. But your discretion comes into play sometimes where you look and you say, well, what does this particular individual have around them? And it's the same thing with anybody else. There's certain things that we have to arrest for, right? Such as, violations of restraining orders, or if there's a domestic violence incident that has, probable cause to believe there was abuse. The law says you shall arrest, right?
Right, I'd say, probably on actual, especially violent crimes, that's maybe an easier question.
It's an easy call, right.
Maybe the ones that more gray areas might be quality of life things, where you sort of see somebody doing something that, noise complaints, vehicle things, who knows, jaywalking.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all these things that you could potentially be out there doing. What's your sort of philosophy to how you tell?
Well, I think we all have, my kind of personal, and I'm not speaking for the other officers in the department, because I think discretion is something that, it's a big weapon or a big tool that we have, right? A big tool that's in our toolbox, and we all use it.
Yeah.
I mean, noise complaints, very seldom does that ever result in arrest. Mine of calls for service like that, which we do over 10,000 calls for service a year. And we make 125, 150 arrests, right?
Yeah.
So if you do the math, right? So it's got to be something that is grievous before we decide to make an arrest.
Yeah.
A lot of what we do is we engage, a lot of motor vehicle stops. People have warrants for their arrest. That's an arrest, right? The court says you shall, right? Bring that person before the court. So I mean, there's certain times you really have to make the arrest.
Right. Another big issue in town that we just went through was the fire station, where the fire department is getting a new station.
Yeah.
I can't help not mention the fact that when we did the tour of your station, there were officers who were not happy with the way
of course.
it looks.
That's going to be that's something that's human nature, right? They're getting a brand new station. But honestly, myself and former Chief Delahanty, we sat in on the meetings. We were at the original design stages. It came down to dollars, right? And the town manager has stated that there will be a phase 2 down the road, but how much? Phase 2, which would be the police department, right?
Okay,
so right now we're just we're trying to paint and clean the building and get it in better shape. Right. Honestly, we kind of pulled away when we knew that how much can you put on the taxpayers, and money was an issue. Right. The fire department, we can make do. The fire department, those buildings, and I had a building background. I was a former contractor. Was scary. Like this, they really needed
Yeah.
to get this done, and I'm glad to see that it's happening for them. And, you know, hopefully down the road, I'll be retired, but in a few years, but, you know, hopefully the police will get a nice new facility, but in the meantime, we're going to try to clean up what we have, and we're going to do the best we can. And
In a lot of towns, they're combined. Was there any thought of that here?
It was discussed on numerous meetings, but it came down to the sites, you know, and where they had the opportunity to put these buildings up, and you know, you're talking another $35 million.
Right. Okay. The 9/11 issue. So when you call 911, you know, the calls go in, as you know, the calls go into a combined center that we do with Revere. Now we're expanding it to include Chelsea.
Yeah.
There's concern among some people that has been raised that could create problems. People might answer the phone in Chelsea or Revere that don't know spots in Winthrop.
Yeah.
That kind of concern. I take it you're comfortable with it. Is there any limit to that? I mean, should we, if that works for Revere, Winthrop, and Chelsea, should we be doing it with, you know, 20 other towns in Eastern Mass, or what's sort of the sweet spot on that?
Okay, so regionalization is absolutely something that, you know, the state government and federal government is encouraging, right?
Yeah.
So when we put in the regional dispatch center, I was in Revere, which is our partner in the regional dispatch center. People thought it was going to be, you know, a more economic process. It's not, but it's more professionalized.
Yeah.
We've seen the issues, like you might say something like, oh, there's a disturbance down by the green bars,
Right.
or Delby's Corner, right?
Right.
So when we started that here in Winthrop was, when they're training their dispatchers,
Right.
they spend some time with us.
Right.
And vice versa. When I'm training our new officers,
Yeah.
I send them to the dispatch center
Right.
so that they can see the process.
Yeah.
And I think it's helped a little bit. It's a training issue. But the
But is-
services that come out of the regional dispatch center are much more efficient and more professionalized than when it was being handled on the local level.
Does it feel like 3 is sort of the good number, or do you think we could potentially go to 5 or 20, or
Well,
somehow
three is what you need to be defined
Yeah.
as a regional
Yeah.
dispatch center, and it was, you know, for Chelsea, it was really a financial, just like it was for us when we first joined. You know, the state's going to cover their first year, then I think it's 50% for the next 2 years, and then they pick it up.
Okay.
You know, but it's going to make it much more. It's going to make it more economically beneficial.
So it sounds
to
like
us.
you're sort of saying then probably that's a good number.
Oh,
I wouldn't go much beyond that,
I'm
much
a
beyond
strong
that.
supporter of the regional dispatch.
No, I just meant whether going any bigger
Yeah.
than that.
Yeah.
How hard is it to get officers to work in this town? Is it a difficult
Oh,
sell, or is it an easy
Great
one?
question. Great question. We had a very serious retention problem at one time because it's a small department. There's not a lot of opportunities to be a detective or work in a traffic unit or K-9 or whatever your desires may be.
Yeah.
And in my tenure here, we've probably lost upwards from, I'd say, a dozen police officers to the state police. Lynn, you know, they left and went to bigger agencies, Boston, majority of the state police. But the town manager seen it as a problem. We introduced the Quinn Bill to everybody, which is that's an education
So
benefit,
a benefit, sure.
right? That we had for years, and then it was taken away from us.
Okay.
That has done that, and our schedule is, we have a good schedule. It's a 4 and 4. You're 4 days on, 4 days off.
Okay.
That has, and along with the Quinn
Is
Bill.
that the norm, the 4 on?
Well, it's becoming a desirable
Yeah, okay,
schedule,
okay.
but that has, we have people wanting to come here now.
Right.
We've had 3 hires recently. An officer left, went to Swampscott, he came back. An officer left, went Cohasset, he came back. We took a lateral from Revere. All excellent hires.
Yeah.
And again, it's kind of changed the culture here. People want to come here now.
Yeah. And housing costs are not a barrier?
No, they're not mandated to live in town.
No,
you
but
know,
I mean, just
yeah.
it's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely the real estate values here is, it's certainly an issue. We have many officers that don't live in town.
Right.
You know.
Okay. So you're feeling pretty good about that overall then?
I do. I think it's moving in the right direction. Yes.
One thing I can't help notice that when we did the tour were the bicycles hanging in the
Yes,
garage. They
yes.
seem to be pristine despite
Yes.
being old, which suggests
Yeah,
they're not really getting
yeah.
used. What's going on with that?
Well, the manning power it was difficult to man them through the last few years. We're still down maybe 3 or 4 bodies, but we've recently been committed, and we joined NEMLIC, which is a regional law enforcement team, which is made up of like 30 cities and towns. They have a special operations unit. They have mountain bike units. They have school resource officers that are constantly communicating, working together. So we joined that, and I've kind of revitalized the bike unit, and hopefully, you know, our budget and our financial resources will be able to put them out there a little more.
I understood it was a matter of training. There's some formal training you have
Well,
to go
there is,
through, and
but you know, that's not really.
Okay.
It was more of a manpower issue, and you know,
okay.
yeah, I think you're going to see more of it.
Well, one last question. I have
Yeah.
to say, it had just happened again in the last couple of days where someone Zoom bombed a town meeting.
Yes.
I don't know if this
Yes.
is maybe not the biggest issue for the police to deal with, but
Yeah.
it's a matter of public, you know, community togetherness to be able
Yeah.
to have these meetings online for people who can't get to them, and this
Yeah.
is happening. Is this something for you guys to look at, or
We looked at it when it originally first happened. It was at a town council meeting.
Yeah.
But you know, they know how to spoof. We call it spoofing.
Yeah.
They spoof the IP addresses. They're very hard to track. We did identify a group in the first incident that was at the council meeting. The last two have been very disturbing.
Yeah.
The first one was very disturbing as well, but it you know, we were able to track it to a group, not an individual, out of Maine.
Okay.
They were sending letters into the town hall.
Okay.
We kind of feel like that might have been a spin-off from the tragedy on Shirley Street a few years back.
I mean, the two people were shot.
Yes,
Yeah,
well, you know, that was
yeah.
a major incident, and we think that might have been kind of fueled a little bit of that, but they're very difficult to track down. And quite frankly, you know, the first incident, there really was a question whether there was a crime there, because it's really just an exercise of their First Amendment right? But,
Yeah.
you know, I know the town is making some changes to how the Zoom platform is made available.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
Okay, longer talk. But
Yeah.
Chief, again, John Goodwin,
Yeah,
Chief, Police
yeah.
Chief here in Winthrop. Thank you very much for the time
Well, it
today.
was a pleasure. Thank you.